Hello! Today we're going to be discussing the flapper era of the 1920s and how it reshaped gender roles and social norms. I'm your host, Joseph Johnson, historian here at Odessa College. I'm working in tandem with your English department over this. The reason why we're looking at this period is that it is a time of dramatic cultural change, especially for women. It is essential to understanding for all of Fitzgerald's works, especially the Bernice bobs her hair, the one that you'll be looking at. It is also, as you probably already know, Fitzgerald has wrote a lot of stuff from the 1920s. The Great Godspeed, as most people would know. His wife, Zelda Fitzgerald, was an atypical flapper. He was the unofficial chronicler of this time period for the flappers movement. So we're going to take a look at that. Now, the flapper is coming off of the back of World War One. So we had a moment in American history in which women had more rights that they didn't want to give up. They had more opportunities, economic opportunities, thanks to World War One. Now, yeah, some women did tend to go back to the what was considered typical women's roles in society at that time, but there's quite a few that did not. In fact, more than 10%, around 10% of married women actually worked outside the home during this 1920s, which is one of the bigger increases of this time. So we'll see a lot of different factors that come into expanding the women's role or creating of the flappers movements. And we get the 19th Amendment, which is the women's right to vote in 1920. During this time, we'll get a push for the Equal Rights Amendment, though it failed. It was going to provide elimination of all legal distinctions based upon sex, unfortunately. Margaret Sanger, she will make large strides in providing contraceptions to women, sparking a new wave of birth control rights. And for better or worse, it will also help increase sexual liberties. That depends on your point of view of that. I know that that's kind of more of a controversial topic, but women were getting more sexual liberties during this time. We also get the 18th Amendment. This created prohibition. Now, what does the outlawing of alcohol, have to do with any of this? Well, it created a new area of entertainment and liberal activities, such as drinking and stage performance and new jobs with speakeasies, the illegal underground clubs where jazz and activities and gender roles were kind of blurred down there. You also have the automobile becoming more commonplace, so more your average Americans are getting these automobiles and things along those lines. This will provide more liberties for the woman to be able to travel wherever she wants, when she wants, well, necessarily having to be at the beck and call of her husband or her father or what have you. You're getting more women in education as well. More women were going to college and what have you. And overall expenditures will increase with women getting the most of the buying power in the home. 90% of household expenditures were the women. They were actually new technologies, dishwashers, washing machines, and things like that will actually cut down home chore times, allowing even married women more time for recreational activities and things along those lines. So, what is a flapper? We can't really identify when the word technically entered in American slang, but we do know it appeared just following the Great War. During World War I, there was a lot more restrictions on clothing and dyes and things like that. You had rationing for the war efforts. You also had a lack of finances as well. Now we have kind of a inflational boom, monetarily speaking, and kind of a pushback to that that very much forced restrictions upon American people. So the classic images of the flapper are stylish, young party girl. They smoked in public, drunk alcohol, danced at jazz clubs, practices sexual freedom. This all shocked the old Victorian moralities of their parents. They were famous or infamous, depending on your point of view, for their rakish attire. They donned fashionable flapper dresses that were shorter, as you can tell from the images. They revealed the calf lengths. They were calf length revealing, so they kind of not only just revealed the ankles, but also all the way up, sometimes up to the knee. Now, I know that may not seem so risque today, but it definitely was back then. And of course, a lower cut line of the neck area as well, exposed shoulders. These are all things that were pushing the envelope of fashion at the time. One thing that they particularly preferred was more of a straight and slim silhouette. So binding down breasts and slimming through different fad diets at the time, sometimes only consisting mainly of cigarettes and coffee as a normal form of breakfast and lunch, and and leaving any type of real nutrients for dinner, along with bottles of wine, were some of the crazy fad diets of the time. They wore high heel shoes. They threw away their corsets in favor for more free lingerie. They applied a lot more makeup than their predecessors. Rouge, lipstick, mascara, other cosmetics became more and more popular. And then, of course, they cut their hair into that famous bob style. Not all women did all of this who would classify themselves as a flapper, but this is what was kind of the in the style at the time. It was the it style. You also got media feeding into this. You know F. Scott Fitzgearld. You're going to read one of his stories. You also got Louis Long. She wrote for the New Yorker under the pseudonym Lipstick. Her famous work recounted her life and adventures as a flapper, going to these speakeasies, talking to courting men, things along those lines. Of course, we also have to add in film. The film industry definitely had a big impact that made the flapper look, style, and attitude more upfront and normal for your average Americans. This is not to say that this wasn't an international thing. In France and England, the flapper movement was also taking root over there, as well as Germany. In fact, that's one of the things that the Nazi parties will push back, is some of this liberal culturalism that's going on. So with film, we get some books that were turned about flappers that were turned into films, like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and it's followed, but Gentlemen Marry Brunettes, were famous satires of the flapper world. And the first one, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, was converted into a film and released by 1928. These popular movies exploded throughout the 1920s, and the screen versions of flappers were typically less permissive than the real world versions. But that doesn't necessarily stop some of the films being very risque, especially even by today's standards. The first popular flapper movement was Flaming Youth, released in 23, starring Colleen Moore, who was one of the Hollywood's soon go-to actress playing flappers on screen. Louise Brooks on the left, she didn't get the part for Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, but her iconic look and her acting career became an archetype version of what a flapper looks like. We also got some other major women out here. Clara Bow and Anna May Wong, they're both very famous actresses of the time as well. Clara Bow's nickname was the It Girl, referring to the 1927 film It, nothing to do with Stephen King or clowns or anything like that. No, in fact, it was an adaptation of a magazine article about flapper activities. She was very she had very strong sex appeal on the screen, and so a lot of people loved her and her videos, but they were very risque, bubble bath scenes, all types of things. Anna May Wong, on the other hand, she broke extreme barriers. First Chinese American movie star, and of course her image off screen as a flapper was actually partly pushed by her own studio to help her break away from just playing exotic roles that she was kind of typecast in. It's kind of unfortunate what happened to her. She did not get a part that would have probably won her an Oscar. And the most horrible thing was that it was over a Chinese uh, immigrant story, or Chinese story about a lady during one of the Chinese rebellion civil wars. But that's neither here nor there. What is here and there is that both of these girls, as well as the others I mentioned before, definitely are out there. They're influencing other women who are seeing them in magazines, seeing them in movies, reading about them, and the way that the flapper culture was appealing to them. Of course, you can't forget the dances. Dances became more risque, not by anything by today's standard, but by the Victorian standards of their parents. The Charleston and Black Bottom were very popular and more suggestive than what we would see from their parents in the Victorian era. So, one side fun note about this is that sometimes, you know how kids do these little challenges, right? One of the challenges of the time was blast the radio at a stoplight, because by that time jazz is starting to become more and more popular. So you would hop up on top of your car and dance on top of your car before the light turns green. But with the popularity of the flapper movement, this also brought out the popularity of jazz from underground and will kind of help push for the re-legalization of alcohol. Now, this cultural change is part of the cultural wars during the 1920s, and so they were also met with criticism. Older generations saw them as reckless and immoral, leading to societal tensions. There was a lot of double standards. Women were still judged more harshly than men whenever it came to pushing these boundaries. So, luckily, Fitzgearld will capture both excitement and the conflicts of this era in his books. And we have crazy amount of pushback. Some women in, like, for instance, Utah and Virginia and Ohio tried to pass legislation. Someone will pass legislation, attempting to pass legislation over the length of skirts, or banning any dress that revealed too much of a woman's throat, or ban form-fitting outfits. Women populating the beaches on the new bathing suits. Yeah, that's a bathing suit that's being measured by the sheriff there, or the deputy. If they were considered too revealing, they could be fined and forcefully removed from the beach. Clergymen, politicians, and others, they'll constantly push back on this new women's liberal cultural movement and push for regulation of women's fashion and behavior. Of course, some women who were pushing for women's rights at the time even would criticize some flappers as pushing way too far with their promiscuous ways. Unfortunately, the Great Depression will help end the flapper movement. Of course, you also have the Hays Code, which will severely limit sexual themes in videos and movies at the time. That will also influence TV when TV comes about later on. But between the Great Depression, the pushback from the politicians and what have you, just nobody really had time to continue with their flapper fun, or money at that time either. And then, of course, the media started dwindling it down, and so it's less out there influencing the public. So, best of luck with your F. Scott Fitzgerald analysis. I'll see you guys next time.